Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel to order. It's now 6:30 on Monday, what was today? The 28th of 2022 at 6:30. So the meeting is now in order. We're going to do the roll call of the members. We do have a new member. When we get to Mary, hopefully she'll go on a little bit more about her bio. And then we did follow the proper procedure. Mr. Dave Noyes tonight is pinch hitting for Patrick O'Brien, and the proper procedure was followed with the state for the substitution of the pinch hitting for tonight. So my name is John Mahoney, and I am appointed to this position by the Plymouth Select Board. Yes.
My name is Mary Lampert, and I was appointed by the Senate President.
Jack, yeah, we'll just go around to the left.
Sure. My name is Jack Priest. I'm representing the Department of Public Health. I'm the Director of the Radiation Control Program for the state of Massachusetts.
Hi, my name is Seth Pickering. I work for the Department of Environmental Protection. I'm the representative on the panel for the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs.
My name's Bob Hayden, and I'm a commissioner with the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities.
My name is Henrietta Cosentino, and I was appointed by the Plymouth Select Board.
Henrietta, is your light on?
Sorry. Henrietta Cosentino, appointed by the Plymouth Select Board.
And over to Mr. Noyes.
Dave Noyes, Holtex Decommissioning International.
David Nichols, Plymouth resident, appointed by Governor Baker.
And hi, I'm Mary Gaslick. I'm newly appointed by the Senate Minority Leader. I'm actually a resident of Plymouth. I've been living here since 1986. I just retired from Pilgrim Station, and I've been working there for 31 years. So I'm very happy to be on the NDCAP. Thank you.
Welcome.
Really welcome, thank you. Pine Dubois, appointed by the Speaker of the House of Representatives and a Kingston resident.
So now we'll go on to the members who are zooming in. I believe we have, I think that might be Susan Whitaker there.
Yes, good evening. Susan Whitaker, representing the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development.
And then I believe above her on the square is Mr. Moylan.
Yep, John Moylan, Holtex, Site Vice President.
And then Bob Jones.
Evening, everyone. Robert Jones, Executive Office of Health and Human Services, representing Secretary Mary Lou Sutters. Thank you.
And I don't know who's in that next block. I know Mary, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Waldron. I'm the Executive Director of the Old Colony Planning Council. We're the regional planning agency that includes Plymouth. Thank you.
Oh, is that John Viveros? Is that John Viveros there with the?
Yep, you got it, John. Good evening, everyone. John Viveros, representing the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency and the Executive Office of Public Safety.
Okay, I.
That's it for members. You have
Okay.
Mike Jackman,
Drabinsky. All right, that's it for members. I know there's a handful of other people up on the screen. Representative from the NRC, and I can see Mr. Jackman, who I believe is representing Congressman Keating's office tonight. So welcome to all. We will move on to the first order of the agenda, which is the previous minutes review for approval. Anybody have any outstanding concerns about the last meeting's minutes?
Yes, I have a couple of things. Not worth spending much time on, but on the first two parts of the previous minutes, the corrections weren't quite correct. So I would like to revise them as follows. First, Mrs. Cosentino asked to confirm that neither tritium nor other radionuclides are included under the EPA or MassDEP list of pollutants. Mr. Priest affirmed that that is the case. The intent of my question wasn't to ask about the NRC, but about the EPA and the MassDEP. So that's the reason for my correction there. And the second correction was fine
Hang
except...
hang on,
I'm sorry.
Henrietta. So you want to replace NRC with EPA?
No, I want to replace it with the, yes.
Okay.
Because the original question was, really, the intent of the question was as to whether any of the radionuclides were listed as pollutants under the EPA or the MassDEP. That was my question. And then the second one just came out backwards. It should read, Ms. Cosentino requested that a reference to Ms. Turco be replaced by, quote, that was the backwards part, replaced by a member of the public named Diane. That should read the other way around. I requested that a reference to a member of the public named Diane, that's how it appeared in the minutes, be simply replaced with Diane Turco. Just give her her name. Yeah. Okay.
Any other critiques of last meeting's minutes? Dave?
Just a question on page 6, line number 22. There's a reference to water, and Holtex assured that the water was not radioactive. I think that section was in reference to the water in the cable vault that had been pumped. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, that was not subject to any other water source on site other than.
Please make sure your microphone is turned on.
Thanks. So just to reference it to the, specifically to the cable vault rather than any other source of water on site.
So you would say what is in the cable vault water?
Yes.
Is that what, okay, great, thank you.
And John, were you asking for other corrections or just to the previous minutes? Because I have a couple of others not regarding the minutes of November.
Just these minutes?
Yeah, just those.
Yeah, okay. So then the minutes for last meeting, I have a couple of corrections on too. The ones that I just discussed were from the November minutes, actually. So,
We'll deal with it.
so on page,
Don't worry about it.
sorry. Page 3, it says, you mentioned that Ms. Lampert moved to make these meetings once a month, and then there were 2 other motions. And you said at the end, it was noted that Ms. Cosentino could have indicated a possible second to the motions above. Well, I think
I'm
it
sorry,
should-
Henrietta, before you move on, can you just give us a line reference,
Yes,
the number?
I'm sorry. Page 3,
Yeah,
just above Holtec update. Mr. Mahoney
Okay, great,
proposed
thanks. Thank
revisiting
you.
the motion. It was noted that Ms. Cosentino could have indicated a possible second to the motions above. It should be noted for the record that I, in fact, would have and could have had I been admitted to the meeting, but I wasn't admitted to the meeting for an hour. I was waving my hand frantically on Zoom, trying to be admitted to the meeting
Henrietta,
last January.
And that's why you have the next agenda item is dealing with that, exactly.
Okay. So I just want that to be noted, that I didn't second it in a timely fashion because I wasn't recognized. That's why. Otherwise, I would have seconded those motions, and did, retroactively.
well, you have another opportunity tonight.
In about
Okay.
3
Good
minutes.
for you.
Okay, anybody have any other critiques of the January meeting minutes? Okay, is there a motion to approve? Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All right,
So, hold on, Dave moved, and I'm going to take somebody else because you weren't remembered. Okay.
Second.
all right, all those in favor of approving the minutes from the January meeting with the aforementioned corrections?
No.
I'll raise your hand. She's already, yeah.
Just learning that, yes. It's okay.
All right, so look, all right, all those opposed? All right, it looks like, fine, it's unanimous.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone. All right, moving on to the next agenda item. Ms. Constantino had just mentioned that. I'm glad to see that you're back from overseas in one piece,
Thank you.
Henrietta. You know, I know you've had some,
But three aren't.
you had some, an unfortunate thing
did.
happen to you. And obviously, the vagaries of zooming in nowadays, especially from overseas. So with that, I'll turn this next agenda item over to Ms. Lampert.
Yes, I put forward three motions, separate, regarding how this group should function. The first, all three stem from trying to better satisfy, in my opinion, the enabling legislation that formed the NDCAP. It says in the legislation that the purpose of this group is to advise the governor, the general court, the agencies of the Commonwealth, and the public. That's number 3. And number 4, it says that this group should be a conduit for public information and education on and to encourage community involvement. Initially, we met once a month. Then it was changed to meet every other month. And so the motion is to return to meeting every month, with, I believe, the exception of August and December. So that's 10 meetings. The reason for that, I think, was pointed out by December 1st, when the press announced that Holtex intended to dump 1 million gallons of radioactive contaminated water in Cape Cod Bay. Well, we didn't have a meeting following that press announcement. I would call it an emergency meeting. And we didn't have a meeting until the end of January. And at that meeting, it wasn't solely devoted to this issue. And I think really it was a disservice not to meet every month, to be able to deal with what was continuously in the press. There were protest groups that had formed, and at this juncture, we are very involved in site cleanup. And so there's clearly going to be other issues that are involved. There was a demonstration, and there have been many, of workers, for example. And I think the rest of the community and the press, the panel, would like to learn what's going on with these workers. Why are they protesting, like every Saturday? And so as a result, therefore, I think it would better serve the public and the governor, the legislators, the press, to spend more time and get more informed at this juncture that we're at in the decommissioning process. End of speech. All those in favor? No, you say that.
No. So you have to make it in the form of a motion.
Yes, I move.
Okay, maybe that was long. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I move that the DCAP meets on a monthly basis as opposed to every other month.
And I second that motion.
Okay, so there's,
Remember to turn on your thing.
all right, so there's a motion, and there's a second on the floor. Any discussion?
Mr. Chair, I have a question. It's Mary Waldron.
Go ahead, Mary.
I'd like just to ensure that the meetings are still a virtual meeting, if given that option.
Oh, I'm sure moving forward, Mary, no matter how this vote goes, that certainly the Zoom option will, I'm guessing, in the immediate future, yeah, and maybe forever, is going to be there. So.
When we discussed the motion initially, I did mention at that time that being both virtual and in person is a great advantage for those who are at a distance and for the public.
Any other discussion points? Okay. Pine?
I'll just say that as the chief cook and bottle washer, it's much easier to do 2 months than every month. That organizing the meetings, setting them up, establishing a relationship with all of the people to speak, trying to track down people that are appropriate to bring information to the panel and to the public and to the state and to Holtec takes a lot of time, and that without the staff that we ask the state for, without additional support, it's very difficult to do that. And I don't really agree that it's necessary in order to keep track of the decommissioning process or to bolster our information. And I also believe that the public is certainly free to hold forums on their own.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Just passing along some feedback from EEA. If the group chooses to go to monthly meetings and extending the time, IWG members highly recommend that the committee decide on a standardized format for the meeting minutes. EEA has previously indicated that it will be very difficult to provide the administrative support for minute preparation. And EEA recommends that lengthier quarterly minutes be produced, supplemented by minutes for interim meetings prepared by an NDCAP designee that focus on outstanding items for follow-up. Any content that's apparent from prepared presentations need not be reproduced in meeting minutes. So that's my comment.
Ms. Constantino?
Yeah, I just want to circle back to Mary's rationale, and I happen to agree that it's very, very difficult for the NDCAP to have the ability to respond to an urgent issue such as the issue of dumping, which has really commanded the attention of a lot of the public, but there has been no way for that to be expressed in what I think is an appropriate fashion at the NDCAP. And that is one of our missions, is to make it possible for the public to engage and have its voice heard. And that just hasn't happened much and can't happen very easily when there are critical issues and there's no meeting for 2 months. That's my thought. And I would like to also make a comment about the agenda. I appreciate the work that it takes to put together an agenda, but mostly, for the most part, it seems to me, it's been quite formulaic. First, Holtec does the update, then the working group does its update, then the NRC may or may not be there, but it's fairly formulaic. I would like to draw your attention back to page 6 of the minutes of the last meeting, which said, Ms. Dubois raised concerns about aquatic life in the bay. Ms. Dubois emphasized how the public should know whether there's contamination in the oysters. Ms. Dubois questioned the panel on how to structure the next meeting and which members should be invited to join, EPA and/or NRC. In response, Mr. Nichols suggested that the Department of Marine Fisheries could be invited, and possibly Woods Hole Institute. Ms. Lampert suggested inviting Seth Schofield from the AGO. Both of those suggestions, or all three of them, I think were excellent, but they appear to have been overlooked or dismissed. And furthermore...
Or may I respond?
Pardon me? Yes,
So
please.
I've spoken to DMF.
Okay.
I spoke to Vinnie Markowski, who has sampled the Discharge Canal for 25-plus years, and he didn't want to come to the NDCAP meeting, but told me that in the 25 years that he has worn a dosimeter diving into the Discharge Canal to collect fish and oysters, that he has not come across any detectable amounts of radiation or contaminants. I reached out to Dr. Ken Bousselere at Woods Hole. by telephone, by email, and by 3 other people, and I have yet to get a response back in the last 6 weeks. I have reached out to several others, and I'm just saying, it takes a long time to drag certain. It's like fishing out in the ocean, you know.
Right.
You don't like catch some, you know, you don't hook something and then bam,
Right.
it's in the boat.
Right.
So, you know,
Okay.
it takes a while. I respect what you're asking for.
Mhm.
I believe very fully that we have more to learn.
Mhm.
I do not think accusing Holtex is the way to learn it. I think they have the resources to help us.
Wait,
Wait a
back in-
minute, let me finish what I'm saying. I don't want to get into a debate with you. I'm just telling you what's on my mind here. That we need information, and that to get information requires a bit of legwork. I am trying to do that. If other people have ideas about that and want to drag someone else to us, I think that would be great.
Well, now that you mention it, I did write an email to you both chairs, on March 3rd, suggesting 2 suggestions. The first was that Irina Ripina from Woods Hole, would be willing to zoom in and spend 20 minutes talking about the nature of the currents in each of the bays and the way 1 million gallons of radioactive water would, what would happen to those 1 million gallons. And that was a serious suggestion. I'm sorry, I didn't know that you'd reached out to somebody else. How could I? But I did make the suggestion. I also suggested that it would be appropriate for our panel to consider current legislation moving through Beacon Hill, one of which is an emergency legislation bill. I did not get any response to those suggestions. I resent it 2 more times, 3 more times, I believe, and I never got the dignity of a response. So perhaps I don't know the protocol for making an agenda suggestion, but I do think that it would have been nice to get a response. And then it would have been an opportunity to explain to me who else you'd reached out to. But I got no response in 3 weeks.
Okay.
Is there a reason? Is there a reason?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Nichols, go ahead.
I think that we should spend more time listening to the people that have showed up tonight than talking about frequency of meetings. My plan is to vote no for this. I'm delighted to see so many people here, and I hope we have this turnout. And I don't think we need more meetings to get a good turnout to have a good discussion.
All right, any other comments under discussion? All right, I'll call for the vote now. All those in favor of Ms. Lampert's motion? Anyone on the screen in favor? Okay, so it looks like 2 in favor.
So it fails.
All right, all those opposed? All right, so we have to differentiate. So Mr. Moylan, Mary. And we got a few abstentions to my left. All right, abstentions?
And that's a no vote.
All right, 6 abstentions. Okay, the motion doesn't pass. Two. Looks like 6 abstentions, 2 in favor, and 5 opposed. Mary, did you also want to talk about the length of the meetings? You had brought that up last
Well,
time.
there are 3 motions, so now we're going to do 2, hopefully quickly.
Okay, sure.
The second one was to extend the NDCAP meetings to 3 hours, as opposed to the current 2 hours. I will quickly give an example why. Item 7 in tonight's agenda is the NRC talking about effluent discharges. Very important topic. The panel is given 10 minutes for questions. Now, there are 21 members on the panel, so that would be 30 seconds each. Or if there are only 10 10 members attending and going to discuss, that would give each one a whole minute. Well, that's ridiculous. And so therefore, if the sessions were longer, the panel would be able to ask more questions, make comments to help the learning process, and also would allow the public to step in and speak and ask questions. That should be the end of the discussion.
All right, so that was a motion, correct?
Yes.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Second, Henrietta. All right, discussion on the second, on this new motion? All right, I don't see anything in Zoom, so we'll call for a vote. All those in favor of this new motion?
Let's see.
All right, 2 in favor, all those opposed? Looks like 7 opposed. And I think, sir in the front row, I think that last vote was 276. Yes. Okay, I'm sorry, now abstentions. Abstentions? Yeah, definitely, it's a repeat, 276.
Yeah.
2 votes, okay? You're welcome.
And then third motion, quick, that there be 2 periods for public comment as opposed to the current opportunity at the end of the meeting. Reason for this is a sort of modeling on the Vermont decommissioning panel. They recognized that some people cannot stay the length of the meeting. Of course, they have longer meetings. And also, it was very important to allow the public also to make comment in the middle, which usually follows the important speaker. For example, tonight it would follow the NRC, et cetera. And so therefore, I recommend 2 public comment periods. Of course, that would be better if it was a longer meeting. Done. Done.
All right, so there's a motion on the floor, is there a second?
Second.
Second from Henrietta. Any discussion on this, on the motion, which is to include 2 public comment sections in the meeting?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
it's Mary Waldron again. If I could ask Mary her thought process, if you're planning on doing the 2, are you looking at potentially limiting the time if you're adding a second one? So like if there is, to your point, if there is a NRC, per se, who's going to talk, would you say limit it to a certain time or a certain number of people?
Oh, I really can't respond to that because you have to see what the agenda is. I was hoping, obviously, that there would be a switch to a 3-hour meeting. So it would depend what the agenda would be. And if the chair and co-chair are bound and determined to end on the dot, or whether they're going to, as the previous chair did, go longer.
Thank you.
Try and get over
Yeah. So I'm certain, no matter how this vote, Mary, this one goes, Mary, I'm certainly not opposed to incorporating another public's comment section. Obviously it depends on the agenda, what topics are there, and and I think that the prior chair, and certainly as I've chaired, we've certainly gone beyond 8:30 on numerous occasions and pushed 9 o'clock. So, when it's come to public comment time, we have given people numerous opportunities to get up and go
John,
on for
I
10
wasn't
minutes.
criticizing that. I was responding to Mary's comment that if the choice were made, and I'm not saying that had been the case,
Right.
then it would be different, obviously. Nor have I seen what the agenda is 4 meetings from now.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Actually, I haven't criticized at all in these motions. I was just making what I thought were important adjustments.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, David.
If I could weigh in on this one, too. I mean, I think this panel over the last 4 years has been pretty generous in allowing members of the public to actually engage in dialogue with Holtec, with speakers that we've had, as opposed to just sharing their opinion. There's lots of ways for the public to share comment. It doesn't necessarily have to be in this meeting. I think it's when we get into these scenarios of dialogue with speakers that we've invited that the public comment period gets compressed and maybe everybody doesn't have a chance to share their opinion. So, I think we should continue to promote how members of the public can provide their comments, both on what they're seeing on television, what they're seeing in the press about the activities of this meeting. Set up, I think we have an email address where members of the public can submit comments, and if we don't, then we should look at that and catalog all of these public comments on the website where the minutes and some of the other activities of the state are. But I'm not sure just adding another comment period is going to add value in doing that.
Just as a correction, but I want to get on with the meeting like everybody else. But as a question, if people email questions in, is that recorded anywhere? Because when a public provides a question or a comment that is education, it gets people thinking. I'm just asking. I don't know.
There's not a formal
Okay.
procedure, no. Either I get it or John gets it, or if I can respond, I do. If I can't respond, I don't. There's no real formula. I think what Dave is suggesting is a good suggestion. It might take some monitoring or sharing of monitoring those, to weave through the threads. I would just ask the public to, be considerate and to the point. And, the more we have to read through, the less likely things are going to get the attention they need. That's all. So, having the public speak together and consolidate comments, it would be very helpful.
Okay, we're going to vote on and get going.
All right, any other comments on this motion? Any other discussion? Okay. Seeing no further discussion, I'll ask for all those in favor.
Same
All right, 2 in favor, all those opposed? Abstentions? Thank you, everyone. Pine 276. So, moving on to the next agenda item, pinch hitting for Patrick O'Brien tonight is Mr. Dave Noyes, and we'll move on to the Holtec Cdi decommissioning update.
Okay, good evening. The update for HDI's progress at the Pilgrim site. Following the transfer of all the nuclear fuel to the second ISFC in December, all of the sites greater than Class C waste was consolidated into 3 Holtec designed and manufactured non-fuel waste containers. And those canisters are now located along with the fuel on the ISFC pad that was completed in March. Update with respect to demolition. Outbuilding demolition activities are continuing on site. The latest demolition were several of the security bullet-resistant enclosures that were no longer required by the site's security plan changes, and the operations and maintenance building, which is the largest building footprint on site. So right now, that currently brings the demolition to more than 50% of the footprint of site structures. The ones that are indicated on red have been demolished down to the pad. All these demolitions are buildings that were constructed on poured concrete slabs, which gives us additional space for tool and equipment staging. Since the beginning of the decommissioning activities, there have been significant opportunities for innovations at the plant by our craft personnel and by some of our contractors as well. We worked with our vendor partner to design the first in an industry fixture for handling a fuel bundle that was damaged in the 1970s that was safely loaded into one of our spent fuel casks. Use of unique tooling for the application, including plasma cutting 75 feet below the water surface in the reactor cavity for control rod guide tube and thermal sleeve removal, which prevented having to handle the material in the dry well below the bottom head of the reactor vessel with a significant radiological dose savings. We implemented crushing of the riser tubes from the steam separator for waste consolidation that achieved a 66% reduction in waste volume that needs to be handled and shipped from those riser tubes. And during the time when we still had spent fuel in the spent fuel pool, we used the fuel decay heat to heat the buildings through a closed-loop cooling system, which reduced the heat that was rejected to the bay and minimized the amount of fossil fuel consumption and the emissions for that emissions that were necessary in order to be able to keep the buildings heated. For our waste update, year to date, we have shipped just under 11,000 cubic feet of radioactive waste by road or road to rail. Planned shipments that remain in 2020 include portions of the reactor vessel internals and our spent fuel pool racks. For our regulatory affairs update, the revised ESA work plan addressing comments that had been received from the Commonwealth has been submitted and is publicly available. There is the link for it there. The annual update of the decommissioning funding was submitted on March 25th, and that concluded that funding was sufficient to complete license termination planning, spent fuel management, and site restoration. That is available. I can make that available, the link to that as well on the NRC's webpage. The waste management plan has been submitted, is awaiting comments from the Commonwealth. Barge Study concluded that barge transport of non-fuel waste was not feasible due to uncertainties that it will take both in permitting and costs and environmental impact to restore the barge berth. And modifications to the wastewater treatment leach field have been approved by the Commonwealth. We're moving forward with the physical work that will support the plantings for visually obstructive screening of the isphacy. For an update on liquid...
Dave, sorry, can I just adjust your slide so that we can see the whole
Sure.
slide on the screen there?
Sure, thank you. It is, yeah. So for liquid radiological waste disposal, and I really think that one of the things that this panel needs to be considerate of is the fact that the term dumping does not apply here. Dumping is indiscriminate or irresponsible leaving of waste material. The discharge of liquid waste materials is something that has been scientifically studied. It's part of the plant's license. And I think we really need to consider the terminology that we're using in this and other venues. But the processed water is still currently being used for shielding for radiological work activities. To this point, the volume is unchanged. It's still approximately 1 million gallons. We are in the process of validating assumptions with respect to the final radiological and non-radiological quality of the water, and that will help inform our decisions as to what the right method of final disposal is, whether that be trucking to another facility where it would be disposed of, whether it would be through evaporation or whether it would be through liquid discharge or some combination of the three. No data that we've gotten to this point has eliminated any of the three options, and there is still no plans for liquid radiological waste discharge in 2022. On March 16th, we did welcome NRC Chairman Christopher Hansen, visited Pilgrim, toured the facility, received briefings from both HDI and the NRC technical staff. Also in attendance were 5 members of this district's congressional staff, Senator Markey, Senator Warren, and Representative Keating's office. So we have transitioned from CDI to an HDI led project. So as HDI was the licensee for the demolition activities and the use of CDI as its primary contractor for performing activities on the site, we have exercised the option that was part of the contract to cease the work with CDI. So now HDI is performing those activities directly. How that has impacted the work is that the decommissioning resources and technical capabilities essentially remain intact. One exception to that is the fact that CDI had 3 unions that were part of a national agreement. In transitioning to an HDI workforce, 5 unions were offered the opportunity to sign up for that national agreement. 4 of the 5 signed up for that agreement. There is still one outlier that has not signed and is currently not performing work on site. But we, as HDI, are committed to ensure that only qualified individuals perform work on the site, and that we will not proceed with work with individuals that are not qualified or capable of being able to perform those activities. And that ends the update, pending questions.
Anyone have any questions of Mr. Noyes?
Being a creature of colors, you showed that slide with 50% of the buildings demolished, and then there were buildings in blue. What were those?
Those are the ones that are scheduled for the next phase of demolition. So I can go back to that slide.
And is that kind of current, or is that next year, or what?
No, it's within the next quarter.
Okay, thanks.
Those specific buildings are the trash compaction facility in the upper right-hand corner, the northern end of the 2-story Butler building is in the bottom center of the building, and a little bit further up to the left is the admin executive building.
And so that trash compactor building, wasn't that where that other low-level waste and whatnot was there?
Yes, it was.
And
it
that
was
is
a Part
all
37 low-level waste storage facility.
And that is all, whatever's still on site has been removed up to the ISFC?
There is still some waste that's in the process of being relocated. None of the waste that was in the trash compaction facility was moved to the ISFC.
Oh.
It's all candidates to be transported. None of it is greater than Class C.
And how do you decide what is trucked and what is railed? Is that within the scope of DOE, or how is that process figured out?
It really depends on the size of the shipment. It's beneficial in order to be able to implement economies of scale to do it via rail. So the majority of the shipments now are road to Mansfield, where they pick up the rail spur and then are trucked to WCS in Texas.
Mary?
Yes, concerning the workers that haven't re-signed on, how many workers are there in that group? And have they been replaced with permanent workers?
I don't know the numbers. I'm sorry, I don't have that information. There have been some cases where the work activities are being performed by other bargaining unit individuals where they're qualified to do so. And in some of the cases, like for asbestos removal or demolition, that work activity has slowed until we can make sure that we've got qualified people to be able to perform that work.
I think someone in the audience knows.
Yeah, my name's Andrew Marshall. I'm the business manager with Laborers Local 721. And I was going to get in at the end of the public comment, but I think this is a good time for me to address this. So just to back up a little bit, all the slides that Mr. Noyes has showed you, the canister, the dry casks.
Please use the microphone for questions.
Sure, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Marshall, if you could just be on point for a couple of minutes, then we can get you back up into public comment, okay?
Yes, okay, I'll be on point, and I'll delve into what's really going on in a little bit at the end. But to answer your question, Ms. Lambert, there was approximately 60 laborers who have been locked out or laid off, if they want to deem it that way, for over basically the past month since this new 5-craft agreement has come into place. So all the slides that Mr. Noyes showed with the dry casks and the demolition was done by local men and women who are trained, experienced, and who have over 50 years experience at the plant. All those workers are now home, and they're bringing in new workers who have absolutely no experience, never stepped foot in a nuclear power plant before, no training, and they're under the guise of decommissioning specialists working with the Carpenters Union. So these are not experienced carpenters who we have no problem working with. We've been working with all the 5 other crafts for 50 years. All of a sudden, we had 2 weeks to sign this agreement that we already had an agreement. The original 3-craft agreement was to expire September 30th of 2022, and Holtex or HDI sent our international union in Washington this new contract and said we have 2 weeks to sign it, and we simply did not feel comfortable signing that without any meetings, any explanation. One meeting took place, the meeting did not go well, and now all our members are being locked out, and they're bringing in very unqualified people, not only to nuclear, but in construction in general. So that's actually what's going on down there.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Jack?
If I could, I mean, it's important to understand that the term lockout does not apply here. This is a craft union that does not have a contract to work on site. With respect to the amount of time to be capable of reviewing and signing on to the agreement, 4 bargaining units had the ability to be able to do that. This is not a local issue. This is not an issue that HDI has with the local. This is a national issue.
Any other question? Any?
Is it national?
I'll open it up later, sir. Any other questions from the panel with respect to Mr.
John?
Dave?
Yeah, Dave, you didn't mention SNC Lavalin, I think is what the name of the company was. Could you talk a little bit about how they're impacted by I think that they moved on. I know this panel has heard concerns about that company in the past. I don't know whether they're true or not, but it's been a subject of discussion. If you could just talk a little bit about how they fit into this.
Yeah, CDI was a combined unit of Holtec Decommissioning International and SNC Lavalin. CDI, or what SNC Lavalin specifically brought to the table was a lot of understanding of the early phases of the decommissioning activities. A lot of that is, we're beyond that now. And a lot of the engineering, manufacturing capability that's necessary in the decommissioning environment, we found that Holtec has the ability to do that every bit as well as anybody else. So it didn't make sense for us to continue that arrangement.
So Lavalин's gone?
That's correct.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Jack?
Yep. Dave, could you expand a little bit? What we just heard was that there was some work that's been deferred or pushed out. Since we're on a fixed budget and a fixed timeline, what's the impact of that?
It doesn't have any impact overall on the ability to be able to implement our overall decommissioning schedule or demolition schedule. So these are things that we have the ability to be able to factor in sequence. We have continued on with the primary critical path work, which was the fuel, the greater than Class C waste, and then moving on to characterization of the spent fuel pool racks, and then the reactor vessel internals removal and disposal.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions from the panel for Mr. Noyes?
One last question. I think you mentioned the 3 options, including dehydration or
Evaporation.
I had thought that in a previous meeting. Oh. Sorry. In a previous meeting, it's my understanding that somebody, probably Pat, said that evaporation was no longer a realistic option because it needed more heat, more.
It does need more heat. Evaporation using the heat of the fuel is no longer an option.
Right.
It would have to be an active process that would either use electricity or fossil fuel that would be used to heat the water to create the evaporation. But it is possible. It would be a very energy-intensive activity to do, but it is a possible option.
But it's not a very likely option.
It's still very much on the table.
But it's not a very desirable option.
Indeed.
From some of our opinions.
Okay, Dave, thank you. Next thing on the agenda, we'll move on to the IWG activities and update from Ms. Pickering.
Mr. Chairman, let's see, I'm here to report for the IWG tonight. I'm going to start with the environmental site assessment update. The DEP and the Department of Public Health have been working with the Attorney General's office to formulate a formal response, which was provided to Holtec back in January of this year. Holtec responded on the 25th of February, and the agencies are currently reviewing a revised ESA. So that's currently under review, and the ESA work plan must be approved by the state under the settlement agreement. The Attorney General's office also received a response to its letter dated November 22nd, informing Holtec of its noncompliance with paragraph 24 of the Commonwealth settlement. And Holtec has submitted a radioactive waste management plan for review and approval by MEMA, the Department of Public Health, and DEP. The Attorney General's office and the agencies are currently reviewing that response. Update on the Mpdes permit. Much the same as what we've reported before, as discussed at the last meeting. US EPA, the Mass DPH, and the Mass DEP were previously notified by Holtec that's planning to dewater the reactor, steam generation systems, and the spent fuel cooling system that contain radioactive water as part of the plant decommissioning process. So if the agencies receive a formal request to discharge to Cape Cod Bay, including sufficient analytical information to make a determination, EPA, Department of Public Health, and Mass DEP would review and provide a determination to Holtec on the applicability of the existing Mpdes permit on the proposed discharge. If a new Mpdes permit were to be required, that new permit would be subject to a federal consistency review by the Office of Coastal Zone Management. Another item, on December 6th of 2021, Holtec released a statement on Twitter saying it will not release in calendar year 2022 any of the water in question, and they would continue to review the issue. And to date, the agencies have not received any notice of Holtec's intention after the December 6th statement. The interagency working group is aware that both the US EPA and NOAA have issued letters indicating their position on the discharge of the cooling water into Cape Cod Bay. Multiple state agencies, including DPH, DEP, CZM, and Division of Marine Fisheries, are continuing to monitor the situation. The next part of my update is for the purpose of answering some questions that I've received directly from Diane Turco and also from Jim Lambert. So I'm going to start with the first question I received from Diane by email on February 9th of this year. And the question is, does the state have a plan to stop Holtec dumping water, or is the new legislation to prohibit radioactive discharges the plan? The answer that I have is that Mass DEP, together with EPA, has been in contact with Holtec about its prior statements regarding the potential discharges. And as I've stated before, if a formal request to discharge to Cape Cod Bay is received from Holtec, the agencies will review the request and respond accordingly. As far as the legislation is concerned, the state agencies have no comment at this time. Another question from Diane Turco came in on the 9th of February by email, and the question is, can DEP and/or the Department of Public Health get samples of the spent fuel pool water now and the water being used to disassemble the reactor? The answer is that Mass DEP and Department of Public Health are currently evaluating this question. Let's see, on February 14th, I received a question by email that said, what was the consequence of Holtec's violation of the Mpdes permit for the November 2021 mistaken dumping? The answer that I've got for you is that Mass DEP is currently evaluating the 7,500 gallon unauthorized discharge to the Mpdes and the Massachusetts Surface Water Discharge Permit. It was done to a storm drain connected to outfall 007. That outfall number is from the Mpdes permit. And that occurred on November 8th at Pilgrim Station from an electrical vault. So that is currently under review by Mass DEP, and the department does not comment on cases that are still under deliberation. I received an email from Diane on the 17th of February that had a number of different questions as well, 7 in total. The first one is, what chemicals or levels violate the Clean Water Act? The best answer I can give on that is that there are 126 priority pollutants that are regulated by the Clean Water Act, and the levels that are allowable for discharges are set by each individual permit. The second question I had was, is it understood that this dump was a violation of the Mpdes permit? And the answer is the pumping out of the electrical vault in question to a storm drain that is connected to the outfall 007 as identified in the Mpdes permit is not authorized. Third question is, what is the consequence for Holtec? A fine. And the answer we have right now is that there has been no enforcement action taken to date. And again, the department does not comment on cases that are still under deliberation. Fourth question, also, do you know when is Holtec planning to test the water in the spent fuel pool? And the answer to that is no, we don't. Let's see, fifth question, will LNLSP, DEP, and the Department of Public Health be overseeing that? And the answer is that there will not be an LSP involved, but as stated previously, Mass DEP and the Department of Public Health will be involved if testing occurs. Sixth question is, has Holtec been required to test the spent fuel pool water periodically? And if so, would you have an analysis for the latest test? The answer is no. The water has not been tested for any reason for compliance with Mass DEP requirements. Seventh and last question from this email is that the NRC says Holtec can resume discharging. Who is responsible for direct oversight to make sure that that does not happen? The answer is the facility will be required to comply with all federal and state requirements. So those are the questions that I received from Diane Turco since the last NDCAP meeting. I also have one from Mr. Lampert. Jim Lampert sent me a question on March 4th. And the question reads, what does Mass DEP do in the way of establishing limits and regulating radioactivity in, for example, Cape Cod Bay, Plymouth Bay, and Duxbury Bay, all of which are clearly outside the plant boundary? The answer to that is that Mass DEP regulations do not establish limits on radioactivity in liquid discharges, and Mass DPH regulations do not apply, as the facility is not licensed by Mass DPH. Radioactive effluent concentrations are regulated by the United States NRC. Moving on, let's see, other compliance issues. The company is conducting response actions under the Massachusetts Contingency Plan. This is an ongoing process. They're addressing releases of metals and PFAS compounds to groundwater. If the response actions to address these releases cannot be addressed by April 21st of 2022, then comprehensive response actions under the Massachusetts Contingency Plan will have to be initiated until a permanent solution is achieved. The assessment of releases of non-radiological oil and hazardous materials will continue as the structures are removed from the site. Mass DEP's asbestos section is actively engaged in overseeing the demolition activities that are ongoing at the site, as Holtec's presentation showed, and we are regularly meeting with the company to manage the asbestos discovery, identification, abatement, and removal process. On the asphyxie visual barrier, Mass DEP approved an amendment to the plant's wastewater treatment license that will allow excess leaching pits to be taken out of service from the wastewater treatment plant, and this will make room for the actual visible barrier to be installed up between Rocky Hill Road and the asphyxie. And that was a requirement of the settlement as well. Public safety, MEMA. MEMA continues to work with local partners on public safety planning, and MEMA is scheduled the next Pilgrim Working Group meeting with the licensee and the former emergency planning zone communities. This meeting will be held virtually at 10 a.m. on April 19th, and an agenda will be provided at a later time. And that's my report.
All right, thank you. Seth, especially with your due diligence to answering questions from the public. Any members of the panel have any questions for Mr. Pickering? Mary?
Yes, you said that the state must comply with all state requirements. And so with
So let's back up, Mary.
you said comply with all state requirements.
So,
That Holtec.
yeah, so question number 7 that I got from Diane on the 17th of February. NRC says Holtec can resume discharging. Who is responsible for direct oversight to make sure that doesn't happen? And my answer was the facility will be required to comply with all federal and state requirements. Is that?
Okay, that's what I was referring to. Thank you
Okay.
for correcting it.
Yep.
Therefore, it would seem that there are Massachusetts laws and federal on the books that would prohibit discharging or dumping, whatever you want to call it. There's Mass General Law 132A, Section 13, that protects Cape Cod Bay, Plymouth Bay, Duxbury Bay, Plymouth, Nantucket Sound, blah, blah, and portions of the Atlantic Ocean as ocean sanctuaries. So they would have to comply with that, correct?
They're going to have to comply whatever they're applicable to, Mary.
Okay, and then there's MGL Chapter 270 that makes it a crime to deposit or discharge waste or other material of any kind on various places and in or upon coastal or inland waterways or on property of another. So that would seem to
So what I'm
apply.
going to suggest is if you have a specific question about applicability to a certain regulation, citation,
Well, that's what I was doing, yeah.
yeah, but I'm not going to be able to give you an answer on that tonight, so be glad to,
To email it to
I'm
you?
sorry, pardon me?
Yeah, there was one more, and there's a settlement agreement that Holtec agreed to comply with all applicable environmental and human health-based standards and regulations of the Commonwealth. So that seems to cover the issue. And then there's the Supreme Court
And the issue is what?
that they would not be allowed to dump if the state decides to enforce the laws on the books. And last, the
Well,
Supreme, to talk about,
Is your question whether or not the citation that you're
yeah,
saying, whether it's applicable to the facility or not?
yes.
Okay, I can't give you an answer on that tonight, but we'll be glad to take it under advisement and get you an answer.
Thank you very much, because I appreciate, you know,
Sure.
how you handle all this. But I must correct a thought about the NRC is in charge of radioactive materials, because the Supreme Court in 4 cases has said that the state has authority if the issue involves economics. Also, the state would have the authority for after-the-fact instances which dumping in the water would be an after-the-fact.
I'm not aware of what you're referring to exactly, Mary, but again, if you have a question
I'll
about
send
that, with citations and, you know, applicability discussion, sure.
Great.
Okay.
Is that any different, is that any different than what we normally do?
So that's a question that.
I haven't dealt with DEP before.
That's a question that we can bring back to the interagency group, working with the Attorney General to say, here's a specific citation that was asked at the NDCAP. How is that applicable to this situation?
Perfect.
Bring that back.
So,
And we'll be glad to do it.
great.
All right, Dave Nichols?
Yeah, thanks, Seth, for your report. It was helpful. I'm sure that when you look at some of these discharges, like the accidental discharge that happened, the statute's probably pretty clear about the civil and criminal penalties per incident or per activity. So I'm curious if the state thinks that if Holtec gets fined for activities, if they can pay that out of the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust Fund, or does the fine get attached to someplace else?
I can't answer that. We can check into that.
Okay.
But so is your question, in the event that the facility was subject to administrative penalties, where would the money come from?
Yeah, I guess, I mean,
Yeah,
I don't think it
I
should
don't
come
know
out of
the
the
answer
Nuclear
to that.
Decommissioning Trust Fund, right?
I think that's an
So-
appropriate question for Holtec.
Okay, well, I'm happy to ask Dave, too.
Yeah,
Thanks,
right.
Jack.
Yeah.
So, as one of the regulating agencies, I can't answer that question of how does Holtec pay for that, a fine or penalty? Where
Okay.
does that come from?
I didn't know if that was part of the settlement agreement either, where the fines would come from.
It is not, I don't believe it is part of the settlement agreement.
Okay.
Any other panel questions for Mr. Pickering? And upstream. Diane, you're not a member of the panel. When it gets to public comment, I'll call you. No, no, Mr. Marshall's going to lead off public comment when we get there. Okay, so we're moving on to the next agenda item. Thank you, Mr. Pickering.
Thank you.
The NRC presentation oversight of nuclear plant effluent discharges from Anthony Demetriadis.
Yes, good evening. That's correct, Anthony Demetriou.
Welcome, sir. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to give you a short presentation. on-
Anthony, can you turn up your volume?
I'm very close to my microphone, so I hope
Thanks,
that
that's
you can hear
good.
me.
That's good, yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Good evening. As was said, my name is Anthony Demetriadis. I'm in the NRC Region 1 office. I'm the branch chief responsible for oversight of our agency's inspections of decommissioning activities at the Pilgrim nuclear plant, as well as other decommissioning power reactors in the Northeast. I'm here to provide you with a high-level summary about our reviews of effluent releases from the plant, with an awareness that there continues to be, as evident tonight, interest in how roughly 1 million gallons of water with low levels of radioactivity that remain from the plant's operational life will be disposed of. Next slide, please. So if I could leave you with 3 important messages, it would be these. Number 1, any effluent releases from Pilgrim or other U.S. nuclear plants must comply with the NRC federal limits, which are designed to protect public health and safety. So that's number 1. Number 2, the NRC staff independently verifies whether the discharges are being conducted consistent with our regulations. And number 3, any and all releases must be quantified and documented in reports filed with the NRC, and we in turn make them publicly available on our website. It's important to point out that Holtex has not made a decision, as you've heard tonight, yet on whether to resume liquid radioactive releases at the Pilgrim nuclear plant. However, if it does decide to use that option, a separate NRC approval would not be required, provided the company is in compliance with all applicable NRC and EPA requirements. The water disposal options being considered by HDI include evaporation, as you've heard, trucking the offsite for disposal at another facility, or discharge into Cape Cod Bay. We expect HDI to notify us of any decisions it makes with respect to the disposal of the water. Next slide, please. Controlled releases of liquid and gaseous radioactive effluents from nuclear plants within the federal limits occur throughout the life of these facilities. Indeed, NRC regulations take these releases into account as part of our agency's safety and environmental evaluations. Such releases must meet both NRC and EPA requirements. The liquid discharges from nuclear plants take place from the water has been filtered, treated, and placed in a storage tank where its contents undergo analysis for any radioisotopes present before discharges, that is. If based on that analysis, it's determined that what we call a batch or gradual release of water from the tank can be done, then the company may proceed. How do they calculate this? Well, it's based on evaluations using the plant's ODCM. You might be thinking, okay, well, what's ODCM? ODCM stands for Off-Site Dose Calculation Manual. The ODCM provides the procedural details that implements the site's technical specifications and specifies methodologies a licensee will use to maintain compliance with 10 CFR 20.1301 and 1302. Next slide, please. So you might be thinking, okay, what's a CFR? What's 10 CFR 20? So for those interested in additional details about NRC limits, when it comes to effluent releases, you can find them on our website in 10 CFR 20. This slide shows a section of the regulations in 10 CFR 20.1301, and it's titled, as you can see, Dose Limits for Individual Members of the Public. The bottom line is that a member of the public may not be exposed to more than 100 millirem in any given year from operation of a nuclear plant. The reality is any exposure levels are typically far below these limits, as has been the case with Pilgrim. For comparison purposes, the average American is exposed to approximately 620 millirem of radiation exposure each year from natural and man-made sources. So this is an average American, or as we state in the regulations, a member of the public, not a radiation worker. Next slide, please. The Environmental Protection Agency also has radiation protection standards when it comes to nuclear power plants. And what you see being projected is the relevant EPA regulations, which are set at an even lower threshold than those of the NRC. Next slide, please. The NRC license for Pilgrim, held by Holtex Decommissioning International, or as you've heard, HDI, specifies these requirements. It also mandates that the company document all liquid and gaseous releases and assessments of any potential impacts on the environment. It does this in annual reports filed with the NRC that are publicly available on our website. One of these reports is an annual radiological effluent release report, and the other is the annual radiological environmental monitoring report. The former lists and quantifies discharges. The latter provides an update on the latest results of the plant's required environmental monitoring program, or REMP, as we say. Next slide, please. So you may be thinking, okay, what does this all mean? Well, with respect to a plant's REMP program, the Radiation Environmental Monitoring Program, it can include such data gathering as air, water, plant, soil, milk, fish, sediment sampling, along with measurements of direct radiation. Pilgrim's 2019 REMP reports note that environmental sampling media collected in the vicinity of the plant and at distant locations included air particulate filters, charcoal cartridges, vegetation, seawater, sediment, Irish moss, shellfish, American lobster, and fish. During 2019, there were 1,191 samples, almost 1,200 samples, collected from the atmospheric, aquatic, and terrestrial environments. In addition, 527 exposure measurements were obtained using environmental thermoluminescent dosimeters. The TLD, thermoluminescent dosimeter, or TLD, is a type of radiation dosimeter that's made of a piece of thermoluminescent crystalline material inside a radiolucent package, where a dose measurement can be used to calculate absorbed dose to the TLD, and therefore the person wearing the TLD or the area where it's posted, it reflects the number of millirem or millisievert that is reflected in that it's measured in. Next slide, please. As part of its oversight activities, NRC staff reviews HDI's ongoing compliance with regulations and license conditions, as well as compliance with record keeping and notification requirements. Along these lines, we issued an inspection report for Pilgrim on August 10, 2021, in which we describe our inspection activities that included a review of the results of routine radiological effluent and environmental monitoring, radioactive waste processing and storage equipment and areas, and changes to the plant's off-site dose calculation manual, the ODCM that I mentioned before. The inspection consisted of observations by the inspector, interviews with site personnel as he walks around the site, a review of procedures and records, and plant walkdowns or visual assessments, as we routinely do when we're on site. Next slide, please. To provide some additional specificity, the NRC inspector observed the condition of the liquid effluent radioactive waste radiation monitor, its associated valves, and walked down the exposed portions of the discharge piping. The inspector reviewed the results of a recent pressure drop test of the liquid radioactive waste discharge line, which was performed to verify the integrity of the piping and its connections. The inspector selected a sample of effluent radiation monitors to determine if they were appropriately calibrated. The inspector reviewed the annual radioactive effluent release report and the annual radiological environmental operating report for any anomalous results to verify that reported doses were below regulatory requirements. In other words, we independently verified that if HDI decided to resume liquid effluent discharges, they could be carried out safely and in compliance with the NRC regulations. And we will continue to provide that level of independent oversight going forward. Next slide, please. Now, you may have seen the slide previously. Our lead decommissioning inspector for Pilgrim put this together using the annual effluent reports for the plant. Again, Pilgrim, like other nuclear power plants, has discharged liquid radioactive effluents over the course of its life, I think in the early 70s when it began operating. These totals just cover the period between 2004 and 2021. You may notice that there were no releases from 2018 to 2021. The plant, of course, permanently ceased operations in May of 2019, but you can see there were quite a few releases in both the years 2011 and 2013, as you can depict the higher pink peaks there. Next slide, please. So this slide may also be familiar to you. The top dotted red line shows the NRC limits when it comes to whole body dose exposure to radioactivity from a nuclear plant to a member of the public. And as you can see, it's listed as 100 millirem. And I understand that millirem is not as easy to some folks to grasp or be used to, I should say, as inch or pound or things like that. But I'm trying to do my best to give you some context here. The red dotted line, like I said, is at 100 millirem. The lower dotted red line indicates the EPA limits for whole body dose of 25 millirem. Near the bottom, you can see how Pilgrim releases between 2005 and 2021 relate to those limits. It is clear that they fell well below those thresholds. They're a fraction of what the limits are, as you can see. Next slide, please. Now, you may be thinking, okay, what is a millirem anyway? To help provide some context on radiation exposures, in 2006, there's an organization called the National Council on Radiation Protection and Measurements, NCRP, evaluated the radiation doses to the US population from all sources of ionizing radiation and published their findings in NCRP report number 160. In this report, radiation exposure was presented in 5 broad categories. Number 1, exposure from natural radiation, background radiation, including radon in our homes. Another one is exposure to patients from medical procedures such as X-rays and nuclear medicine procedures. Exposure from consumer products or activities involving radiation sources such as home smoke detectors and other things, but that's one example that people can easily relate to. Exposure from industrial, security, medical, educational, and research activities involving the use of radiation sources when the public is in proximity to these sources. And exposure to workers that results from their occupations such as commercial nuclear power, medicine, or aviation. The NCRP estimated the average yearly radiation dose to an individual in the US to be approximately 620 millirem. To put this number in perspective, the average radiation dose from a single chest X-ray is approximately 10 millirem. Just to give you a little perspective, the National Council on Radiation Protection Measurements is an advisory committee. It advises the nation's experts on radiation protection to ensure that our standards are up to date and consistent with the International Council on Radiation Protection and Measurement. Formerly, NCRP had a different name, slightly different name, National Committee on Radiation Protection and Measurements, and so on. But it's an advisory body, and it's made up of very unique experts on radiation. Next slide, please. So this slide breaks down by category those radiation exposures. you can see that radon and thoron exposures and medical procedures are significant contributors to the radiation doses experienced by many Americans as they go about leading their lives. So what I wanted to bring to you basically is that it may be perhaps a misconception that maybe some Americans thought that, well, there is no other sources of radiation, and why, should I be concerned about this potential discharges resumption at Pilgrim? And the answer is no. There are other sources of natural and man-made radiation for which average Americans are exposed to, and that's basically the context that I wanted to bring you tonight. And next slide, please. So to summarize, we will continue to do our due diligence when it comes to engaging with HDI on its plans for disposing of the water and to ensure it can be carried out safely if a decision is made to resume the liquid discharges. As we've stated previously, the company would not need a separate approval from the NRC if such releases are performed in a manner consistent with the requirements, that is, if they meet the limits. This concludes my presentation. We're prepared to answer any questions. And I recognize that my video thing shows Neil Sheehan, but he forwarded me the link so I could do the presentation, but Neil's here with me, and we can answer some of your questions.
Oh, all right, Anthony, thank you. That was fantastic. So I'll turn it over to the panel. Any questions for Anthony or Neil? Dave Nichols.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anthony, thank you for the presentation. I'm curious, I'll ask the same question that we asked Mr. Pickering. In the event that, and I'll ask it generally, in the event that you find a licensee in violation of one of the NRC regs and you assess a civil penalty, in decommissioning, are they allowed to pay for that out of the decommissioning trust fund?
I do not believe that they can do that. The decommissioning trust fund monies are required to be used for decommissioning activities, and I don't believe that they can utilize those funds to pay for civil penalties.
Okay, thank you.
Mary.
Yes, it appears that NRC policy and requirements would indicate that Holtex would have to ship and not dump. ALARA 10 CFR 20-1101B requires an NRC licensee to achieve occupational doses and doses to members of the public that are as low as reasonably achievable. New Reg CR 2907, Volume 24, 1.2 says that, quote, maintaining radiation doses from radioactive effluents as low as reasonably achievable is an NRC requirement. Obviously, dumping would not satisfy that. There is the NRC's backgrounder on tritium says that, quote, in principle, no dose should be acceptable if it can be avoided. Holtex can avoid any dose and meet the ALARA requirement only by using their other option, the option of transporting the contaminated water off-site. NRC also says it supports the no threshold or no safe dose that is the policy also of the National Academies of Sciences. Therefore, that says ship, not dump. Do you disagree with what I'm saying? How do you satisfy ALARA? How do you satisfy the no threshold? How do you satisfy what is said in the NRC backgrounder on tritium, which, by the way, tritium cannot be filtered out if you allow dumping or discharging, whatever you want to call it?
Thank you. So I would slightly disagree, Ms. Lambert, that the ALARA principles, correct, as low as reasonably achievable within the context of the limits that are prescribed in Appendix B And those limits are designed to protect the public health and safety, and they were set at a level low enough to ensure that the public health and safety is maintained.
Now, what was the date?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
What, please explain, is the date of the science that supported the dose limits that NRC feels are acceptable? I understand they did not include the more recent science, for example, Beer 7. Am I correct?
I don't have that information, but I can get it for you. I don't have it off the top of my head of what year the last scientific recommendation that was made.
And I'd also say for safety that allowable doses focus only, I understand, on cancer, but they do not look at other risks, such as risks to pregnant women, the embryo, fetus, that can bring about early miscarriages, malformations, genetic defects, particularly, I'm thinking of organically bound tritium. Is that, am I correct? You only look at cancer?
We look at health effects that would affect the population. Of course, to get to those, to the concerns that you raised, the limits would have to be exceeded at least 1,000-fold. So, the limits that are set for the public are much, much lower. And so,
is this just cancer? Is this just cancer? That was a question. And
we've seen that cancer is the. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Fatal cancer.
We've seen that at much higher doses than what's allowed for the members of the public, that cancer is the first thing that we look at, because that's at much higher doses. That's what some of the things that that the experts have seen at much, much higher doses. And so, yes, that's the thing that we look at. Yeah, if you're asking me if other concerns, other health effects were studied, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, well, I think the point being that I'm making is that the allowable dose limits are based on antiquated science, number one, and number two, it does not consider all the health effects that can result, according to the National Academy's Beer 7, from exposures at much lower doses, and therefore it's not acceptable. When there is another option, they do not have to dump. And so everything that was said about dumps, about releases in the past, frankly, are irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. Because we can go on the deficiencies of the licensees monitoring. But thank you very much. And I'll look forward to getting a written response from the email of questions that were previously sent to you. Thank you.
Mary, and we'll go down to Henrietta.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Dimitriadis. How are you doing this evening? Thank you for being here. I do have a question for you. Tritium is the isotope of concern for the water that they're looking to discharge. Does tritium occur naturally?
Yes, it does.
Right, so we would expect to see levels of that already in the water of the bays, correct?
Probably. I haven't seen the samples of Cape Cod Bay, natural samples, but I would imagine that you would see some. Of course, this tritium would be coming from byproduct material from the reactor, yes.
Is there a difference between the types of tritium? One from the reactor
no.
and one naturally occurring?
Tritium is tritium. It has a half-life of about 12.3 years. It has a biological half-life of between 7 and 14 days, if it enters into the body. It's got the highest emission of beta is 18.7 kV, which typically is about a third of that for the betas that it emits, and it's one of the least hazardous isotopes, if you will, that we deal with.
Thank you very much.
Henrietta? Mary?
Go ahead.
Organically bound tritium is something that seems to have been ignored, and I wish you'd go into that, because organically bound tritium, once it is ingested or goes through the skin, remains in the body for a far longer period than regular old tritium. And so it is important when one is considering the effect of discharging into the bay and then putting that with a circulation in the bay, which allows the tritium to get into the sediment, and then you get into the situation of the filter feeders, the oysters, the clams, the mussels, etc., that are ingested, and once tritium is ingested, you have the beta particles that can cause serious health effects, particularly with fetuses, with pregnant women, because it can go through the placenta and have very negative effects on the fetus. And so just looking at regular old tritium, as the previous question seemed to address, is a disservice. And again, tritium cannot be filtered out.
Thank you, Mary.
Any other panelists?
Yeah.
Henrietta?
You mentioned, you talked about the batch requirements, that if water is released into the bay, it has to be done according to NRC regulations that require it to be done in smaller batches. I think 20,000 gallons at a time. Am I right about that?
I don't believe it's a standard amount. It has to do with what the concentrations look like, and the licensee would decide how much volume would be appropriate to meet the concentration limits. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's 20,000. It really depends on the concentrations.
Okay. Well, my next question is, suppose you release 1 million gallons in, let's say, 20,000 gallon batches, and you do it like every 3 days. What's the difference between doing it in batches and doing 1 million gallons all at once? I mean, it's more convenient, I suppose. It's rather unwieldy to unleash 1 million gallons, but why does that make it any better? In the end of the day, you've got 1 million gallons in the bay. Isn't that so? Or am I missing something?
So the reason that we set the limits to where they are, it's because it's not just for decommissioning reactors, it's also for operating reactors, which are discharging. And it's very important to note the difference between dumping and discharging. Mr. Noyes was correct. Dumping is indiscriminate release, and without really measuring or anything, just dumping it. Where this would be a discharge, and the licensees, all licensees, actually, they actually measure what they're about to discharge, and they do it responsibly, provided that their sampling is correct. And they do that, and that's our job to make sure that that's done. And so, to your question, what would be the difference? The difference is that as long as they meet the concentrations, that they do that in accordance with the regulations, then there are a lot of assumptions that were taken, that were made, very conservative assumptions, to make those limits the way we made them in Appendix B. And one of those is that distribution and how it's distributed and moves on wherever it is that it's distributed. Because our experts have used software where they utilize many assumptions that are very conservative, where they make assumptions that drinking water is used and fish are consumed and Irish moss and lobster and various things. And they make these assumptions that if a member of the public were to eat it, what would be the potential dose to the member of the public, and therefore they would reduce it. They would reduce the limits in accordance with meeting those regulations, and they make it very conservative.
But
Does that make sense?
At the end of the, well, not really, because at the end of the day, you've still got, or maybe it's at the end of the month, after a series of 20-gallon releases or 30,000-gallon releases, whatever it happens to be, by the end of the period involved in getting rid of that million gallons, you've got 1 million gallons in the bay. So any artificial limitations you think you might have created by limiting the amount of the batch hasn't really done anything to limit, because it's all ending up in the bay. And for that matter, how can you make any assumptions about where it's going to go if you haven't studied the currents in those bays, and how much of that water is going to simply sink with its radionuclides, or at least with the tritium? How can you make any assumptions about dilution whatsoever? How can you even measure reliably what a single dose would be? I mean, it seems
All right,
very theoretical.
All right,
and
we got
very,
one more question from
I could answer part of your question, and one of them, number one, it has been studied. Before any nuclear plant is actually built, when it's designed, they do an environmental impact study, and they do an analysis. Pilgrim actually has a decommissioning safety analysis report that you can actually study. As far as the discharge into the bay, the process of timing the batches allows for filtering, treating, and isotopic analysis for each of the batches to make sure that the licensee has a very, specific amount of what it is that they're about to discharge. Like I said, it's very different than just dumping it indiscriminately.
All right, Pine, last question from panelists.
Tony, thank you very much. It was very helpful. Although I have to admit, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one in the room, that I'm still learning a lot about radiation and the risk. I think, part of my stopping point with all of this is that I'm not really all that human-centered, And the dose to a person is so much, it seems to me that we're so much bigger than most of the things that live in the bay. And as somebody that works for a watershed association trying to get the herring back and the eels back and all that kind of stuff, they're tiny, and so I guess what I'd like to know is, where does the biological information come from? Is it strictly, human-centered? Is it all about us kind of thing? Or has the NRC's analysis and the science that you rely on been a deep dive into what my colleagues are trying to get to, which is, at what level would it be dangerous for the living organisms in the bay? And with that, I'll just say that I did not understand how the half-life of tritium can be 12.3 years, but the biological half-life is 7 to 14 days, when somebody else told me it was 180. So, good luck. Thank you.
Well, I'll try to answer that. So for the second piece, that's a lot to unpack, but let me give it a shot. Let me give you a little bit of an analogy with medical treatment. Sometimes people get thyroid cancer, and one of the treatments is to treat it with iodine 131, and that's a very effective treatment for thyroid cancer. Iodine 131 has a certain how can I say, gammas that are much more energetic than tritium does, which also actually has a beta, a different kind of a emitter. But so iodine has two types of half-lives. One is the physical half-life, okay, which is, I believe it's like 8 hours, if I recall correctly. Iodine-131, that is. But the biological half-life is like 3 days. When a patient is treated with mega doses of iodine-131 to treat the cancer in the thyroid, they are given that treatment, and the medical physicist has to make a calculation on the physical and the biological half-lives, which together are roughly, they can, obviously it ranges between vasculature and how much water the person is going through their body and so forth. So it ranges between 2 and 3 days. So after about 10 days of them being treated, first they're treated at the hospital, and they might be actually an outpatient, and then go home. They're told to stay away from their loved ones for like 2 days or so. It's because they actually excrete it through sweat and urine and various other functions. And so it's decaying physically, and it's actually being excreted by the body. So that's the differences between biological and physical half-life. Tritium has a 12-year half-life. So if you have some tritium, if you wait 12 years, you're going to have half of the energetic hydrogen-3, the tritium, that you would have had. However, the biological half-life is as short as 7 days and as high as 14 days. And we know how tritium functions since the Manhattan Project. And we've had people, occupational workers, not members of the public, occupational workers, where if they got contaminated, actually they would be told to go home and drink lots of water or actually beer to excrete it from their body. And so that's something that, so it's been studied for many years. To answer your other question about does the NRC, did it really center its focus on humans? That has been our main focus, is to protect the public health and safety. Are there studies that focus on shellfish and lobster and things? How does the tritium affect them? I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you very. Excuse me. So just for the public's sake, you know, there's a lot of learning to be done in decommissioning. All of our environmental systems are somewhat different, and I think if we can contribute to the learning and understanding, we're going to get a lot better at this stuff than just kind of laughing it off because they don't know the answer. Not everybody knows the answer.
Hey, Anthony, I'm going to open this up to public comment. Do you have 25 minutes where you can hang in and answer questions if they're directed at you?
Yes, absolutely, sure.
Okay, we're going to open up to public comments. So the first 3 speakers are Andrew Marshall, unless he wants somebody to substitute for him, and then we're going to go to Paul Francis and then Diane Turco. You got it.
For the advisory committee. Thank you, Ms. Lambert, for asking and being concerned about, asking the question about the workers earlier tonight. I do believe you're being misled about what's really going on down there with the laborers' workforce. You heard Mr. Noyes call the laborers' union an outlier, or describe us as an outlier. Completely unreasonable, completely unreasonable. I'm not an attorney, but I do study labor law, and I do handle a lot of arbitration cases and different cases every day in my role as a regional organizing director for the laborers' union for the entire New England region. My name's Scott Gustafson. I'm a Plymouth resident, lived here pretty much my whole life. My first job in the union 37 years ago was down at Pilgrim Station. I cut my teeth down there. It turned me into the person I am today I learned a lot about myself then. I came out of high school, went to work a little bit in non-union side, had the opportunity to go there, and was mentored by a lot of people. Changed my life, and today, again, I'm the regional organizing director for the Laborers Union. Learned a lot of things at that plant over the years. A lot of people I know work there. My brother's here tonight, spent a lot of years down there. Actually, just finished up Friday. He's not going back because he's being locked out. Dave White, who mentors a lot of kids in this town, coaches a lot of kids, locked out. He was the steward on the job down there. So many families we know right now are being locked out, and here's what really happened. But again, I'm not an attorney, but when you argue a decision, you use the reasonable person doctrine to try to come to decisions sometimes on what a reasonable person would think. Well, think back of the history of the Laborers Union down at Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant. We built that plant. We have maintained that plant. We have worked there at just about every single outage. I know hundreds and hundreds of families who have worked there, raised their families there because they knew they were good jobs, and they took pride in going in there and making sure that plant was run correctly and safely all the time and everything was done right. That was a job that our members fought for because it was that good of a job, because there was overtime so they could do better for their families. There were so many good things about working at that plant. And when we knew that plant was coming to the end of its life, we contacted, actually, no, we didn't contact them. Holtex contacted us to ask them to come speak on their behalf about how good of a company they were in their experience of working with the laborers around the country at other plants. And we did that. We came down there and we spoke up for Holtex. And subsequently, there was a 3-craft agreement signed with the laborers, the operating engineers, and the electricians to decommission not just Pilgrim, but Indian Point, Oyster Creek, and Palisades in Michigan, and potentially every other nuclear plant that Holtex was going to decommission in the country that they were able to obtain the license to. It was great for us. It was great for our union. It's great for our families. It was great for the people in Plymouth that worked down there, that could provide for their families, that took care of their families, that counted on those jobs for the next 10 to 15 years while it's being decommissioned, or however long, to get that job done, get it done safely, get it done right, but make a good living. Took a lot of pride in it. Recently, we found out that there was a new agreement in place, or a new agreement was written without our knowledge, without our union's knowledge. We had that 3-crafted agreement in place. This is labor law. This is how labor law works. It's a pre-hire agreement. They have an expiration date. The expiration date would have been at the end of October. And we were told there's a new agreement in place with other trades. We simply asked Holtex to negotiate the terms and conditions of that agreement. That we had an agreement in place, that we wanted to learn more about what they wanted to do under the new 5-craft agreement. We asked them to come to Washington, D.C. The meeting didn't go well. And the next thing we know, there was a 4-craft agreement, and the laborers weren't included in it. We did everything right at Pilgrim over the life of that plant, whether it was Mpdes or Edison or whoever else it was. We supported Holtex. We did it. All the things we were supposed to do. As a matter of fact, when Mr. Noyes was showing the cans up there tonight, those were our laborers who Mr. Kelly Trice praised in the Holtex press release recently about how well that was done and done in record time, when he praised the craftsmen. It was my brother who ran that project from pool to pad. He praised him. But because there were hurt feelings over some comments made in a meeting to negotiate in Washington, D.C., they locked out all of our members, and it is a lockout. And that's misleading when you say it's not a lockout and we refuse to sign it. And it's misleading, the comments that Patrick O'Brien made to you in response to Mr. Marshall's letter to the board. It was misleading. We did not refuse to sign an agreement. We wanted to be down there. We've wanted to be down there since it was built. We're locked out. Our families are locked out. You have people who are going to lose their homes. You have people who provide that. They rely on that to provide for their families. We wanted to do it right. We wanted to do it safe, so that everybody in this room could sleep better at night knowing that was getting done right. Now, I'm going to leave it with this. So I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but we know the replacement work is Up to 50% of them aren't getting in because of their criminal background or drug test. We also know that there was a worker found sleeping on the floor last week and was escorted out of the plant. I'm okay with that. He had a bad night, he said. We all have bad nights. But you don't have a bad night when you got to go down and work at Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant the next day. You don't have a bad night. And that's the reason why things have slowed down. That's the reason why the asbestos isn't getting done, because that work was all being done with our members. They're out of there too. We think the NRC has the sway to say to Holtex, put the laborers back to work and stop the nonsense and get this done right, not just here in every nuclear power plant. So thank you for asking. Thank you very much for asking. We're upset about this, and we're not going away. The right thing to do is put the laborers back to work down there, the people who have fought hard to keep that plant running right for the last 50 years, and stop the lockout.
All right, I'm just going to echo a few things that Scott already said. He stole a bit of my thunder, but just a little background on how we got here. So back in 2019, like Scott said, Holtex came to us. They came to the Laborers International Union of North America, the electricians and the operators for the decommissioning, demolition, and decontamination of nuclear power generation facilities. This contract was from 2019 to September 30th of 2022, and this was with CDI. So just mind you, CDI, HDI, and Holtex all share the same exact address at 1 Holtex Boulevard, Camden, New Jersey. They are the same exact company. And don't let them fool you or tell you that, oh, one contractor was dissolved or these corporate strategies out of Canada or anything like that. They're the same exact company. There was political pressure from other plants. This was nothing that anyone here in this area did wrong. This wasn't about Local 721 laborers. This wasn't about Pilgrim. There was political pressure from other plants in the country to get other crafts on the 3-craft agreement. We are not trying to hold anyone out or keep any of the crafts out. I'll be up front. The 2 new crafts that were added to the agreement are the ironworkers and the carpenters. They both have skill sets. We've worked hand in hand with them for 50 years down at that nuclear plant. We built this building you're standing in with all those other crafts. We built Plymouth North. We built Plymouth South. We built Duxbury High School. We built all these schools. We are the fabric of this community. The men and women that are being locked out of this plant aren't people from Tennessee, from New York, from New Jersey, from California. They're people from Plymouth. They're people from the South Shore. They're people from Massachusetts who raise their kids here, who spend money in this town, in this economy. It's all cyclical. It's all connected. And these men and women are being locked out. I even hesitate to bring up unions and jurisdiction and contracts because people get scared away by it. They say, oh, we don't need to get involved. It's about money. They'll figure it out. This isn't about money. Our workers that are being locked out are being replaced by workers who, in the industry, I myself did 5 refueling outages at Pilgrim Station. I was a laborer in the field for 15 years. I've been the business manager for 8 years now. The people that they're trying to bring in, who, mind you, they're having a very difficult time, and don't ask me, you can ask John Moylan, you can ask Mr. Noyes, you can ask Pat O'Brien, these people who are at the plant day in, day out, they're having a less than 50% success rate getting people access into the plant, never mind performing work. They can't even get them a badge to get through security, whether it be a drug test or whether it be the federal background investigation. I take pride in that. I have 450 members. When they have a call for craft, I have to go out and find qualified people who are trained in asbestos, in lead, advanced rigging, just general rad worker qualifications, and that's built over time. That's not a class you go to on a Thursday night or a virtual Zoom and you learn how to be a nuclear radiation worker. That is not something. That takes experience. It takes learning the plant, the ins and outs, knowing how policies and procedures are done there. And these people, and like I said, I'm not throwing anyone under the bus. Everyone deserves an opportunity. That's what we're all about in the union, is giving people an opportunity to better their lives. But not at the sake of the public, not at the sake of the people who are down there, who've made a career down there working, whether it be security guards, supervisors, anyone. Many of those people have reached out to me and said they feel uncomfortable. They feel like they're being set up for failure. They feel like they can't even perform the work they're being asked to do with the people that are being shipped in from, mind you, not local people, they're out-of-staters. They're from Vermont, they're from New Hampshire, wherever they can find them. They're just trying to not look bad and make everything business as usual. There's no problem, nothing to see here, because there is a lot of eyes and ears on them down here. The NDCAP people, you guys, the NRC, there's a lot of people. I've made a call to the NRC with a safety concern. Some of my members, some of the plant workers have made calls to the NRC, and they said, well, at least they're not getting through the gate. Well, they shouldn't be there in the first place, even trying to get access to the plant if they're not competent, if they're not trained. You know, there's been charges filed with the National Labor Relations Board. This thing is it's gonna get legs, and it's not gonna go away. Okay, I'm not saying that these workers will be down there next week or next year. This litigation, whatever, could take 6 months, a year. And Mr. Noyes says this is not a local issue. It's a federal issue. It's all over the plant. I personally reached out to John Moylan and said, John, we can make this go away. This is about Pilgrim. This is about the local people. I'll sign the agreement to send our men and women back to work tonight, tomorrow, whenever you want. I don't know if John has the authority to do that as the site vice president, but I know he has the connections to reach out to Kelly Trice, talk some sense into him, and say, why in the hell would we alienate the people for the past 54 years who have got us this far when we're at the finish line without a catastrophic event or anything, to speak of? Why would we alienate those people and bring in people that have absolutely no experience and no reason to be there? I could talk on this for hours, I really could, but I just want to be transparent, and, if any of you guys have any questions, you can reach out to me, talk to me, and I'll give you any information that we have.
Okay. All right, gentlemen, thank you. Bob?
Mr. Marshall, I don't know if this is a question for you or maybe Mr. Noyes, but there are serious allegations, based on what you've said, the situation as it stands now, there are people there doing work that are not qualified, not competent. This panel, for years, we've had a strong emphasis on the, environment, the community. Our panel has a strong emphasis on the environment, the community, the safety of people. I'm not sure if we have jurisdiction over the labor dispute. Maybe we do. I'm not sure about that.
We can offer our personal opinion, Bob, but I don't think we have any jurisdiction here.
My point, but the issues raised about safety, does the situation right now pose a safety threat to members of the community, the folks that are working inside the facility, the people themselves that are newly hired? Do we know what kind of work they're doing? Are they handling dangerous materials or hazardous radiation? Those are some of the questions that are kind of alarming.
Yeah, I'll speak, and it's my opinion, obviously, but so who are these new workers and how are they getting in there? Well, the carpenters and the iron workers were not on the original three-craft agreement. Like I said, this is not anything against those trades. We work with them hand in hand every day. But the carpenter wasn't there before, so he says, I'll sign any agreement, I'll come down there. Well, they don't have carpenters to go in and do that work that are trained in these skill sets. So Holtex, or HDI, has created the title of Decommissioning Specialist. They've created a new wage and benefit scale that's 25 cents over the laborer's rate. So they're actually paying more money for less experienced people to go in and do this work who have absolutely no experience. I know for a fact that they're new to nuke. Some of them have said, I've never even stepped foot in a power plant. I've never even done construction before. I had people tell me who work in the plant, supervisors, say, one of the workers who was supposed to be putting up or taking down a scaffold, the carpenter, decommissioning specialist, didn't even know how to put the safety harness on. He had to show him. And these are supposed to be trained. That's like 101. That is literally basic things, and he didn't even know how to put the safety harness on. Scott Gustafson noted the other day, one of the security guards said, there was a guy sleeping on the floor the other day. They tested him, he failed the breathalyzer. This is at work inside the nuclear power plant. So I personally do feel it's a risk to the public, it's a risk to the general public, the workers in there, and the workers themselves. And, John Moylan's on this panel. Ask him about if there's, in 2.5 years, there's never been one complaint about the work of the laborers or anything that's been done. Like I said, that whole pool to pad, the asphyxie pad, the dry cask storage, that was largely performed by the men and women in the laborers union. That asbestos work, where they're very proud of these buildings coming down, those are all laborers and operating engineers. That's Costello dismantling out of Middleborough, Mass. They are no longer there. They have ceased to work. They will not go down there because laborers are locked out. Holtex asked them to hire carpenters, these decommissioning specialists, basically change how their company is structured, hire brand-new people just because of a contract dispute, and they said, no, we're not doing that. There's liability, there's risk, there's skill set. That's like asking someone who's never seen a car to be your mechanic because someone had hurt feelings. That's really what's going on here. And this is no fabrication. This is not, like I said, about unions or about us having control over the power plant. It's about safety. It's about the history of the plant, and it's about doing the right thing, honestly.
Have you talked to the Attorney General? And there's also Markey.
Yes, we've...
and the congressional delegation as a whole.
Yes, we've reached out to many people in the state. I know the Attorney General's office knows about this. I know the Governor's office knows about this. I know Markey's office, Elizabeth Warren's office knows about this.
Keating.
Keating, yes, I'm sorry. The, local town politicians, the NRC. I don't know who else to contact at this point, honestly. The National Labor Relations Board, charges have been filed, and so here we are. We're going to be everywhere. We're not going away, so.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you think this has to do with the bottom line, Holtex trying to save money, get rid of you guys, get other people in there, get out fast, keep what's left over? I'm guessing that's what their plan is.
I don't know. I couldn't tell you that, honestly. I've tried to wrap my head around why and the reasoning to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it type thing. And like I said, I don't know if it's about money because they're paying these people who have no qualifications more than the men and women in the laborers union, 25 cents more. So I really do not know what is driving this whole thing. I don't. I know the meeting did not go well in Washington, and I was told Kelly Trice had very hurt feelings. The meeting did not go well, and I would hate to think that over egos and hurt feelings that it's going this far and they're risking the lives of people working there and the public.
I need to break into that. There is nobody risking anybody's lives at the power plant. People are not doing work unless they're trained and qualified to do work, and that's just the bottom line. If you had a situation where your workers were going to work at a plant, would you do that without a contract? Would you do that without having a contract with the company you were going to work for?
We have a contract, and it expires this year, September 30th, 2022.
The contract you have is with the company that is not doing work at that site anymore.
The company is the same company. My name's Andrew Marshall. If I say my name's Adam Marshall tomorrow, does that mean I don't have to pay my mortgage? I don't think so.
It is a different company.
It's not a different company.
It
It's
is.
the same company.
It's in litigation right now.
Successor laws. And Holtec has a successor agreement. If they were to sell the plant, that the agreement with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts still applies. They have a successor agreement. We have a successor agreement.
It's not that.
No, it's a successor agreement, and it's established labor law. And that's why it's a lockout, David.
It is not, the ownership of the plant did not change. The primary contractor changed.
There's still an agreement in place. You can't give somebody a new agreement. And by the way, let me just say this.
Mr. Gustafson, microphone.
It's important that I make this point.
Microphone.
CDI, on September 29th, notified the guards that they would be changing from CDI to HDI. We weren't notified till 2 weeks before you kicked us out. Said it was in a timely fashion. It's not, none of this is reasonable. None of it. It doesn't make sense, as Mr. Marshall said. None of it. So, but there is established labor law, and that could go that way. We never not wanted to go to work there. We never refused to sign an agreement. And I'm not sure if we refused to sign it like Patrick O'Brien said, or haven't signed it yet like you said earlier tonight, because you said we're an outlier and we hadn't signed it yet. We'll sign it right now. Put the agreement up here. We want to go back to work down the plant and decommission Pilgrim safely, so everybody in this room can sleep at night, knowing that it's being done right.
So would you please just stop screaming fire in a crowded theater, because that's irresponsible. The people in this room can go to sleep at night because the systems that are in place will ensure that properly qualified people are performing work at the plant, without exception.
Not as of a month ago, they're not.
All right, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Paul Francis.
Hi, my name is Paul Francis, and I've been sitting here aching to tell you these facts. I'm going to leave you with this tonight. You are going to say when I get through, oh, that's preposterous, but it's not. We have 1 million gallons of water that's being talked about. In 1 gallon, there's 4 quarts, roughly a liter. 4 times 1 million, 4 million liters. Now, in 1 liter of water, there's 55.5 moles of water. If you're not a chemist, bear with it. Don't laugh. 55.5 times the Avogadro number gives you roughly 300 known tillion particles. Now, if you can't wrap your head around known tillion, that's 300 with 24 zeros after it. Now, if you were to take that liter of water, drop it into the harbor here, wait for entire circulation of the oceans, the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian, the Great Southern Ocean, all of that volume of water, and you were to go back and scoop out that 1 liter of water after that length of time, you would have hundreds of thousands of the original molecules in that liter. This is a mathematical fact and can be proven. Think about that times 4 million liters, and he's shaking his head. You didn't have me, you missed the boat. By the way, Marge is dead. Your chemistry teacher, she died of breast cancer.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Ms. Turco.
Can you guys represent the people, please? You were so strong, these guys. Yes, thank you for your passion and your truth. But I just want to talk quickly about tritium. Tritium is, naturally occurring tritium is very rare. It happens in the atmosphere. So the tritium we're talking about really is what's coming out of the reactor. Tritium can bioaccumulate in the environment and in the water. It will attach to the sediments, to the grasses, and guess what happens? It bioaccumulates up the food chain and gets into our shellfish and our fish. This will devastate the fishing community, period, and it cannot happen. Mr. Pickering, I just want to say, why did it take you so long, and why did you have to answer all my questions in public? I'm being rhetorical. You don't have to talk to me.
Well, you asked me the question. The reason I answered your questions in public is to be transparent with what I've received for questions and what the answers are.
Right, well, I asked you to give me...
And you asked me the questions as a member of the NDCAP panel, and so the NDCAP's function is to be public about this process.
Okay, well, I don't...
And so that is what, but you just asked the question,
Okay.
and that is why, and that's the way we're going to handle this in the future, Diane. When people ask questions by email to me individually, I'm going to pass them along to the panel, and that's when you're going to get your answer.
I was asking you as a DEP person. Well, then that's
well-
why we need monthly meetings, because I've been waiting since February to get an
The nature of
answer.
your questions did not go to only DEP things. So
Okay,
you
all right, I
reached
don't-
out to me because
Okay.
I'm on the NDCAP, correct?
Okay, no, I reached out to you because you work for DEP, but I don't want to use up my time because I have some other things to say.
Well, that's the
But
answer to your question.
I'd just like an answer to my
Being
emails.
transparent
No, you weren't. You didn't answer
Questions
me
and
until
answers
tonight.
both.
So anyways, Holtec, yeah, let me go on. Yes. Holtec. I would like to ask Holtec if you recognize the AGO agreement.
Absolutely, we're signatory to it.
Okay. Do you recognize state and local regulations?
Yes, we do, and we're responsible for all applicable regulations.
Okay. I'm going back to Mary Lambert's statements talking about there are regulations that would prohibit the dumping of radioactive water into Cape Cod Bay, and basically, part of the definition of hazardous material in the state of Massachusetts, in their laws say that radionuclides are hazardous material. Are you familiar with the pending legislation H4444 and S2791 that would prohibit the dumping of radioactive materials into the Cape Cod Bay?
I've heard of them, I'm not familiar with the details of them.
Okay, our legislature and our elected officials are trying to pass even more legislation that would strengthen the state regulations, and that's what they're trying to do. Do you know that Vermont Yankee trucked their water instead of dumping into the Connecticut River?
I believe they transferred it by rail.
Well, they didn't dump it into the Connecticut River, right? They did both. I'm asking Mr. Noyes if he knows, yes. Okay, all right, okay. Okay, but they did truck water away. Okay, yeah, I think there was a lot of problem with them dumping into the river. Thank you, Jack. Do you recognize that Senator Markey, Senator Warren, Representative Keating have also said to not dump into Cape Cod Bay? Have you seen their letters?
I haven't seen anything particular from the congressional staff, no. Not personally.
Do you know that Markey, Warren, and Keating said not to dump into the bay?
No, I don't.
Diane.
Okay, I just wanted to answer the question.
Diane.
Yep.
Okay, this line of questioning is immaterial.
You know, you
Noise,
always interrupt
no-
me when I'm trying to do something,
Noyes,
John. Let me finish,
O'Brien,
please.
Moylan, and all the upper
Yeah.
echelon, they got the memo
Okay,
that the public doesn't want the million in the bay.
right, I'm
They
asking
get
about
it.
Mark, okay, well, I'm asking him, John.
Huh?
I don't know why you always defend Holtec when I try to ask
I'm
questions.
not-
Okay,
that-
so
I'm not
go-
defending them.
Okay, so what I'm saying, let me get to my point then. Mary Lambert brought up, you always do this, it's really not polite. Mary Lambert brought up points about what regulations, state regulations, would prohibit the dumping of radioactive materials. Did you hear what Mary said, John? And
Yeah, and
David?
I'm anxious to see exactly
So
what.
here's the question.
Are you
Why
going to
does-
let me answer your
Okay,
questions?
sorry, go ahead.
I'm anxious to see what the regulations are, because quite often, regulations are preempted by other laws and other federal requirements as opposed to the state regulations. So it's important to be able to not just listen to somebody spout off a specific chapter of Massachusetts general law, but be able to physically review it and determine what applicability it has.
Okay, so the Attorney General said you signed the agreement that you would agree to all the state regulations. So why does Holtex still have dumping in our bay as part of their plan? If you are hearing...
We do not have dumping of anything in any plan.
Oh, discharge, sorry, you meant discharge radioactive materials into our bay. Why does Holtex still have discharging radioactive materials into Cape Cod Bay when you hear so much protest about it? You hear our state senators and our representatives say, don't do it. You hear that there are regulations on the books that already say you can't dump into the bay, and yet you still have that on your business plan. Could you please explain?
The plan is to study and review, and we haven't made any final decision on the disposition of the water.
Well,
And it's not, the decision, as we've said many times, will be driven by science. We understand that public opinion exists, but spending time talking about water, the discharge of water as dumping, does not do a service to anyone in this process.
I know, you sound a lot like the tobacco companies who used to use
right,
bad science, but I
Diane.
have one question for the NRC. The NRC has a regulation. Is he still on? Are you still on NRC?
Yes, I am.
Oh, good, good. All right, so I thought your slideshow was pretty good because you had this on. It said CFR 20.1310F. The Commission may impose additional restrictions on radiation levels in unrestricted areas and on the total quantity of radionuclides that a licensee may release in effluents in order to restrict the collective dose. We are asking you to implement this regulation and say that the dose will be 0, just as the EPA has said in their maximum contaminant level goal for radionuclides. All radionuclides are at the level of 0 for their goal. And so we think this would be a really good step for the NRC to take Pilgrim and do this for our community, because you also have the mandate to protect the people and the environment. Would you do that?
You got to follow the regulations and formally submit it to the NRC.
It was in your slideshow. Yeah. Okay.
Ms. Turco, this is
Okay.
Neil Sheehan from NRC Public Affairs. I'll just say.
Hi, Neil.
Along the lines of what, good evening. I'm going to say along the lines of what Mr. Pickering said. We're going to take some of these citations as a look up and try to get you a more informed answer than try to shoot from the hip here and try to, pretend that we know what the exact part of the regulations you're referring to here and the applicability.
Oh, because it was in your slide program. Okay.
All right, thank
Got
you.
it from you. Thank you.
Mr. Quintal?
Thank you.
Well, thank you all here for being here tonight and allowing me to address the NDCAP panel. This is my first meeting, and I hope to enjoy your company again at a future one. My name is Paul Quintal, and I own and operate a passenger boat business out of Plymouth called Plymouth Cruises, and this is our 26th year. Although I've been only in business myself 26 years, I've been operating small passenger vessels from Plymouth for the past 49 years. And I've also worked in the commercial fishing industry off-season and have been a member of the Plymouth Harbor Committee for the past 25 years. My guests aboard my cruises have enjoyed fishing trips, whale watch cruises, and many other excursions on Cape Cod Bay, often within the site of the Pilgrim plant. In February of 2022, the Plymouth Harbor, Massachusetts, just completed a major dredging project costing over $20 million. Clean dredge spoils are allowed to be dumped at proper offshore disposal sites. Any contaminated spoils which were found were towed to New Jersey and processed for safer disposal. This added a great cost factor to this particular project. The Plymouth Harbor recently replaced a commercial pier, we call it the Plymouth Town Wharf, at a cost of $4 million. This new concrete pier is designed to catch any accidental spills, such as diesel fuel, hydraulic fluid, or other contaminants. And any accidental discharge would drain into a tank as not to pollute our ocean waters. I keep my boat in a local boatyard, and when prepping our vessels for spring commissioning, we are required to use safe sanding equipment attached to a vacuum to catch any paint dust and to protect our environment. In July of 2017, the Plymouth Harbor Committee published a Plymouth Harbor Management Plan. This was accepted by our town officials. This 135-page document identifies Plymouth Harbor's history, its current status of the harbor, and future goals and possibilities. The term, protect our natural resources, is mentioned dozens of times within the contents of this document. My grandchildren live near the Pilgrim plant, and they swim at local beaches. Would you want to eat a clam, an oyster, a fish, or a lobster that had a hint or even a suggestion of contaminating radioactive material in it? We have right whales in Cape Cod Bay tonight. The experts suggest that right whale population is approximately 350 animals left in the western North Atlantic. I speak for them because they couldn't fit into this room. Mr. Knowles clearly stated tonight, moving radioactive material by truck and/or rail has been successful in decommissioning the plant as this point. I think our water might go that way as well. That's my hope.
It has also stated tonight that Holtex has it at a 50% position of decommissioning. And I find it rather unsettling that the contents of radioactive pool water on site is not identified at this point. If you're 50% done, you don't know what's in the pool. That is concerning. The town of Plymouth and its Massachusetts residents care deeply about protecting the future of our precious resources. I would ask this panel and the many other experts that are listening to ensure that radioactive contaminated water does not get released into Cape Cod Bay. Not one drop. Thank you.
Red sweatshirt, the young woman.
Hi, my name's Olivia Mashad. Really bad at public speaking, but so I am a commercial fisherman. I fish out of both the Sandwich Harbor and Plymouth. If you're from around here, I'm on the Big Blue Fishing Dragger Southpaw, and we fish for mussels out of here. And so before we fished and were able to sell our mussels, we had to get them shipped off to see if they had contaminants in them. And we get emails and we are shut down after big rains from storm drains and like road wash down. Whatever is on the road gets into the water and is bad for the mussels. And they pick up on that small amount of contaminated stuff that comes off the road. So what's gonna happen when nuclear stuff is dumped? And yeah, I think someone mentioned it. What they said, it's safe for us, but is it safe for all of the smaller animals? And we go out, I lobster out of Sandwich, so we go out and we catch these small organisms that people eat. And, you know, no one's gonna wanna eat anything that has radioactive material in it, so there goes all the fishing, everyone's fishing career, everyone's family that depends on that. And that's kind of scary. I just got into the business 3 years ago. I've been working with my dad, my uncle, other family members my whole life, but I've had 2.5 full years of working out there. And one thing we noticed that's a big concern is late summer and early fall, there's something called the dead zone in the bay off of Barnstable. And so about 3 years ago, when I really started, we'd go fish dragging off of there. And just with our net, not even a scallop dredge, we'd get baskets of scallops. Fresh, healthy scallops. Most of them were older, but they were healthy. And last year, when we went out, nothing. Everything is dead. So, yeah, so they say it's gonna we're gonna dump it, it's gonna flush, but it's not. We've noticed all the tides, the tide goes in like a toilet bowl, it comes in and goes out through P-Town. But if there's not even enough tide and current and storms to stir up water at the bottom of the bay, it's never gonna get out. That's it.
Great.
You did a great job. What was her name?
What's your name?
Olivia Mashad. And your name, ma'am?
I'm Candy Perry. I'm a newer resident to Plymouth. I'm a realtor with Keller Williams. All of you know more science than I do, and all of you know more about this nuclear waste than I do. What I do know is, I'm going to get emotional. I was a pool and recreational director at a health club, and if we had an accidental diaper in the pool, right, the health department would shut us down. And we would shock it with chlorine. If that didn't work, we'd combine it with bromine. If that didn't work, the answer is drain the pool, and fill the pool. We can't drain the bay. I know that, I'm sorry, this is, there are other situations where, I lived in Ohio before this, and if after a rainstorm, we had the same thing, right? They would shut down the beaches if there were E. coli, right? Not for a day, not for 2 days, for a week or 2 weeks, and they kept testing the water, right? So all of these things we know what little things can affect. I used to sail in Lake Erie. If there were algae blooms in the water, they're like, don't put your feet in the water today. If the water splashes on you, go down in the hole and wash it off. Wash it off, okay? So if we're talking about algae blooms and E. coli and things like this that are little contaminants that we know are contaminants, and we're shutting down beaches for weeks, okay? Bartlett Pond, I live down there near Bartlett Pond, right? The cyanobacteria, whatever, they said, don't go in the pond, and by the way, don't go in the stream that goes to the ocean. Well, then I'm like to my grandkids, don't go in the ocean. Bartlett Pond's dumping into the ocean, okay? Those are simple contaminants. I don't know nuclear. I don't know it. All I know is it's more powerful than all those things I just talked about.
I could obviously go on longer than anybody else here, as anybody is. It's on, as everybody is probably aware who's listened to me before. First thing I think I wanted to respond to was actually the idea of what these meetings could be. I think we saw a fairly good example tonight from the laborers' unions of that the public has a lot that it can do if it's given the opportunity to educate not only the rest of the public, but to educate this panel. And had we restricted, as the agenda I nearly always do, to the spokespeople for the involved industries and the NRC, that opportunity for teaching the public and educating the panel would not have existed. Pine suggested the public can go out and hold its own forums. I won't characterize that except to say that why isn't this the forum? That the panel should listen to the public, that the public should not be given just a comment or a question period at the end, but you should give members of the public who frankly have spent a lot of time working on this and have a lot of knowledge, some of which you'll disagree with, some of which you will agree with. But why won't you take as much time to give them space and formal presentations to the panel as on every week you give other people who frankly are not looking at it the way that I am? I don't see a satisfactory answer, and I think the idea that, oh, we're out of time, it's too much trouble to put together a meeting, I'll give you right now, Pine, give me 3 meetings, you have to fill a slot, I guarantee we will find public people who know a great deal, who would be more than willing to educate the panel, not to rant at it, but to educate it. And then maybe we could have a rational discussion about the differences between their view and those of those people who are the ones who frankly are the only ones who typically have the opportunity to say much to this panel. My second comments are really to the NRC. I was interested in the reference, this goes back to the Manhattan Project. I basically go back that far also. My father was General Grove's executive officer after the war. He died of cancer. He died of cancer that everyone is convinced he got as a result of, oh, it's safe enough at the end of week talk tests. Why do I say safe enough? That happens to be the title of a book that the NRC historian published a few months ago. I think it's a very apt title, because the question it fundamentally raises is safe enough for whom? Safe enough to ensure that the NRC has a continued job, which it would not if there were not a large nuclear industry and if it did not support that industry, or safe enough for both the endangered species and the people that are on this earth. And finally, my wife referred to some questions that she hoped, these were sent to you back in March, earlier in March, that she hoped you would answer. I would urge that you do answer them, because I think they raise important questions and should elicit important facts that the public and this panel need to know when they're making their own decisions about whether or not Holtec should be allowed to discharge this contaminated radioactive water into the bay. I don't really care much exactly about what some of the regulations say, because I think it goes much broader than that. I noted, among other things, that the regulations you cite, that you never cited the REITs that limit Holtec in a liquid effluent to 3 millirem. Instead, we heard the 100 millirem number. But just to say quickly the 4 or 5 questions that I sincerely hope the NRC will take the time to answer so that people can evaluate whether or not this dumping under any circumstances should be allowed. Does the NRC consider the economic effect? I have seen nothing to indicate that it does, and you've heard a lot about why that is critically important here. Does the NRC consider the impact on endangered species? And let's take the right whales as an example. Does the NRC consider the societal effect as opposed to that on the hypothetical individual man? Radiation damage is cumulative. A little more, eventually the cup overflows. Even if your individual man may not receive what you think will exceed your limits, what about all of the potentially millions of people who eat food, shellfish from here that will add something to their radiological load? Does the NRC consider site-specific issues when it looks at, oh, gee, this is what Holtex OCDM says it's going to do? Do you consider where the circulation patterns are? Do you assume dilution, or do you really look at where those discharged materials are likely to stay because of the currents within the bay? Do you look at whether they discharge on an incoming tide or an outgoing tide? Do you look at where are they sampling? Or do you just say, oh, we've got a lot of sampling sites? My fear is that you don't look at any of those, but without looking at any of those, there is no way for this panel or the public or anyone else to realistically evaluate what is the potential impact of what Holtec is apparently planning to do.
Two more.
Hi,
going
Joanne
up, too?
Corrigan. I live within biking distance of the plant, and my grandkids are the 5th generation on Priscilla Beach in the summertime. And I'd like to say a couple things, and I agree with you, we should follow the science, and you can't change the laws of physics, no matter what somebody tells you. And most radioactive elements aren't 7 years and 12-year half-lives. They're more like 50,000-year half-lives. I had 45 years of experience as an X-ray tech. We had physics drummed into our heads at Northeastern, and you can't change the laws of physics, and I agree, radiation is accumulative. It's accumulative, and when it settles in the sand, and the mollusk eat it, and the shrimp, and everything else, and the fish, it affects all of us. all of us. And this whole thing with the power plant, this isn't just Plymouth. You're talking about eastern Massachusetts, if not further, if something happened down there. And not to mention, now they got Homer Simpson running the plant compared from what these guys are saying. Yeah. But, I mean, it's unconscionable in this panel that you don't want to meet once a month with everything hitting the fan at the same time. This is the biggest thing they hit Plymouth in ever. How you don't want to meet once a month?
Excuse me. It's the biggest thing that has hit Plymouth since 1970, okay?
Okay, since 1970.
So, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman has to get on another call, Zoom call. So can we close up your comments, please?
Yeah,
I
I'm
am.
appalled that
I am, and I'm
this
saying-
group doesn't want to put more effort into this. And
look.
once a month is not a big deal, considering what's at stake. That's it.
Fine. Thank you. Next. Go ahead. No, you're doing your Zoom call.
I
Go do
apologize.
your
I
Zoom
have to
call.
go,
Hi.
Stand in line, and then after him, that's it.
Good evening. My name's Nicole O'Brien, and I'm a resident here in Plymouth County. And I don't know everybody's names here, and I don't know a lot about the science and all the ins and outs of all this. But I do know that there have been very few answers to many, many questions that people got a very long time ago. Everybody knew that this meeting was every 2 months. So it's confusing to me why there would be no answers if there was 2 months to get the answers. It seems like the lay people here have had a lot more information to hand out than anybody else that was asked any questions. Neil, I don't know who that is, but that's somebody that was up there that seemed important. This gentleman here that works for Holtex doesn't even know what H44 is about. That's pretty concerning. So this seems to be kind of an ineffective meeting if there's going to be no answers at it. Nobody knows about the regulations. The public isn't allowed to speak often enough, and then you guys are having them every 2 months. It doesn't seem like, also, it doesn't seem like speaking to the public in a condescending manner is very helpful either. So that's all I have to say.
Good evening. Thank you to the honorable members of the panel for having me. I hope no one will leap out of the audience and slap me, though perhaps some of the friends of Holtex might wish to. Just to introduce myself, my name is Dr. Benjamin Cronin. I'm an historian of southeastern Massachusetts. I grew up and currently reside in Duxbury. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on early Plymouth County and the successful and continuing attempts of the several towns, as well as the native Wampanoag people, to preserve our commons. It is in that effort that many of us are here tonight. For make no mistake, what Holtex is proposing to do, and the honorable members can call it anything that they wish to call it, what they are proposing to do is to engross for their own private profit upon the common resources that belong to all of us. They belong to the people of Plymouth County, of our region, of the United States, and of the world. When the average person is told about this in our communities, when they're informed about this plan, which, make no mistake, is being done very quietly, they're shocked, which is quickly followed by revulsion and outrage. And so what is being proposed is contrary to what we learned about in political science way back when, the general will, the great Democratic and Republican, small d and small r, will of the majority of people in these communities. And what we are seeing here, frankly, is what my favorite president, Franklin Roosevelt, called economic royalists, who are seeking to obtain their private gain at the expense of the public good. The public good, the public things, res publicae, the republic in Latin, is the basis of our own self-government, and it's what's at stake here. I'm glad our friends from the labor movement are here. I am appalled, though perhaps not surprised, at the treatment they've received. I would remind them of a quote that I think is apposite from the great Upton Sinclair, the muckraking journalist. It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. I thank you all, and I wish you all a good evening.
So with that ringing endorsement of the panel, is there anything that you want to discuss next weekend? Next next meeting?
I had earlier suggested that it would be appropriate for this panel to at least take a stand on the emergency legislation H4444. It's too late now because the public comment is done on April 15th, which is a shame. But I do hope that the other legislation that's moving through the legislature on Beacon Hill can be considered before that too has come and gone. I just don't understand why it isn't the business of our advisory panel, citizens advisory panel, by the way, to give advice to the Commonwealth on legislation. It seems like the perfect body to be giving that advice. That's all. And there is, the monitoring legislation is still outstanding and still would be very nice to advise on it.
May I make one comment? It would be nice, however, this panel is not able to take votes on such matters.
Yes, unfortunately.
That's the problem.
Well, you mean because there's never a quorum? Yeah, because there's never a quorum because the way it's structured.
Because of the way it's
Because
structured,
the
correct,
state
because that's not
representatives
the way
have
it
to
was set up,
recuse
but
themselves.
Anybody here can form another big group
Well.
and make all the recommendations to the legislature you want. There's nothing in this panel that's so special that overrides that effort. Nothing.
Are you looking for recommendations?
I'm not looking for next meeting?
Yeah.
Yes.
My two recommendations actually is to focus on what was discussed tonight. I think we should get as much information as we can about the status of the union workers. It might be a short update, it might be a long one. Also to continue to focus on the discharge or dumping, whatever your choice of terminology is, and getting more information by having the circulation expert and Buesler, or however you pronounce his name, come here, and they perhaps could do it by Zoom personally here, because I think circulation of the waters is crucially important. Also, chemical reactions, which Buesler focuses on, of radionuclides in the ocean. Those are two suggestions.
Anybody else? Motion to adjourn, anyone?
I'll move that we adjourn.
Anybody second? Second, Jack?
Second. Yeah.
All in favor?
Oh, good Lord.